the journey itself sometimes sucks, and it's sometimes really hard, and it's sometimes really messy. But that's what makes it awesome. Failure is a prerequisite to be successful. Like, there's very few people that haven't failed at some point. There's very few companies that haven't hit a wall and struggled. But what do you learn from failure, and how can you apply that to the next piece and keep moving?
Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I am your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode here, we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the trials and the triumphs of their chosen field. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, and everything in between, we peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Thank you guys for tuning in to this edition of the Beautiful Work Podcast. Today's guest is University of Maryland head baseball coach Rob Vaughn. And Rob got that job as the head coach in his 20s, and it's an amazing story, and he is a fantastic leader, and he's a lot to share about his journey thus far, and I can't wait to bring it to you. Before we do, quickly, announcement-wise, my album Grandeur, my fifth release musically, came out just about a month ago, and really excited about the early reviews of it and the press on it, and I hope you've gotten a chance to check it out. If you haven't, album is Grandeur, and you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, anywhere and everywhere that music is streamed, also on my website. If you are a fan of music, or of my music, or of this podcast, and would like to follow us along, please consider signing up for the newsletter on dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com. They take you to the same place, and you can sign up, and I send a once a month newsletter about all the happenings with the podcast and with music and tours and shows and anything else that is going on. Thank you to those of you that have gone on iTunes and have liked or rated the Beautiful Work Podcast. I appreciate that. And if you are a fan of the podcast, if you could please do that, that really helps for when people are searching for new stuff and they see that it's got good ratings. That really helps for people to find it. So if there's anything you can do after this show, after this podcast, if you could rate on iTunes, that would be much appreciated. Preferably a good rating. If you want to go on and give a bad one, I guess I can't stop you, but I more prefer the better ratings. That would help. And then also, we do have a Patreon page for this show, and so if you are a fan and want to voluntarily become a member on Patreon for $5, $10, $15 a month to help support what it costs to run the show and things like that, you can find at Patreon, patreon.com/Dan Krikorian, and you can sign up and receive some cool stuff. We're going to be making more of a push with that soon, with some more kind of behind the scenes recordings and some different podcasts episodes that we've done that you can only get on Patreon. But for now, if you want to go over and check it out, we would appreciate it. All right, that is it for announcements. Really excited to bring you Rob's story, and man, he was a blast to talk to, and I think you will see why. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Rob Vaughn is a native of Humble, Texas, and is entering his second season as the University of Maryland head baseball coach. Vaughn was hired in June of 2017 to the head coach position at the age of 29, becoming one of the youngest head coaches in the country. As an assistant, Rob's success as a recruiter and his work to help develop the Terrapins' batting prowess, coupled with a maturity beyond his years in his leadership style, Rob endeared himself to many coaches and those in the baseball community. Including the 2018 draftees Nick Dunn and Marty Costas, Vaughn has coached 27 players who have been drafted or have signed professional contracts in his time as an assistant and head coach at Maryland. Vaughn was responsible for helping to bring in the 2015 recruiting class, which was the highest ranked in Maryland baseball history. He was on staff for 3 of the winningest seasons in Maryland baseball history and has coached 3 All-Americans, 4 freshman All-Americans, and 12 All-Conference players thus far in his career. As a player, after a great career as a catcher at Kansas State, Vaughn was drafted by the Chicago White Sox and spent 2 seasons playing in their minor league system before making the jump into coaching. Rob is here today to share with us his life in coaching, leading a major college program at such a young age, and why hot dogs taste so much better at the ballpark. Okay, I am joined now by Rob Vaughn, the head baseball coach at the University of Maryland. Rob, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Absolutely, man. Excited to be here.
Well, excited to have you, and we're going to talk a ton about baseball and coaching and leadership and all sorts of fun stuff. But before we do, for you, when you're sitting down Netflix or Hulu, are there some shows that really get you sitting down for a long time binge watching?
Yeah, the latest one is actually Designated Survivor. It's actually the latest one. My wife and I have been on a binge watch fest on Netflix so I've enjoyed that. But I'm a sucker for just any of the good documentaries. I love the ESPN 30 for 30s. I love Netflix did a documentary on kind of the World Doping Agency or organization, whatever it is, and called Icarus, where it kind of dove into that and just all the craziness behind that. And so we have those. I'm a sucker for all the classics too, the Offices, the Parks and Rec, the Friends, the New Girls, all that good stuff too. That's my wife and I kind of can get sucked into a black hole on those as well.
Yeah, it's good and bad where there's so much good stuff to watch, and then bad because there's so much good stuff to watch with so little time.
That's right.
to do
Especially we got a 2.5-year-old running around the house, so we have even less time to binge watch some of those.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, hey, let's dive in about you and all that you're doing, and there's a lot. But I want you to, if you could take us back. When you're 29 years old, you get the call to become the next head baseball coach at a prestigious school, University of Maryland, in a Power 5 conference. Can you describe for us the emotions and the feelings that you had remembering back to that time and what that was like?
Sure. I think you have this vision of what your goals look like. And I'd always said in my whole life, kind of once I started coaching, my whole coaching career, that my goal was to be a head coach by the time I was 35. That was something that I kind of had in my sights and that I wanted for myself. And here I am, I'm 28 or 29, and kind of see the writing on the wall that our head coach is about to get an opportunity to go to a school in a situation that's just a perfect fit for him and his family. And we kind of saw this coming a little bit, that we thought it might happen. So you're sitting back, your season ends, and, as coaches, that's when you hit that May, June, July, that's when you never know if you're going to be in the same place, if you're picking up and moving and what goes on, especially when you're an assistant coach. And so knowing our guy was about to get a chance to leave, I was really hoping because of our success, I got a chance to stay at Maryland and keep some of the staff there and do some things. But, when you sit back and you have this vague idea of what it's going to look like, you don't think of all the struggles. You don't think of all the craziness. You think of all the cool things that come with being a young head coach. And I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I remember, I prepared. I got a call from our associate AD about 30 minutes after our head coach called and told me he was moving on. I got a call from our guy telling me that our athletic director wanted to meet with me the next morning. So I prepare everything, get my suit out, get ready to go. And, I'm sitting on the couch with my wife, and I just had this moment, and I kind of pride myself in not getting overwhelmed by too many situations. I feel like I can really slow some things down, and even I'm usually pretty comfortable stepping out in the unknown a little bit. But this was kind of a whole nother ball game, and I'm sitting there and I look at her, I'm like, babe, can I do this? Am I ready for this? It was about a 3-minute panic attack on that. And she's, of course, being the supportive wife she is she's awesome. She talked me through it. You can do this. You got this. And sure enough, I go in the next morning, meet with our athletic director and our associate AD. I kind of lay out my vision for the program, what I believe we can do, kind of how I believe in getting there, and not really knowing how it went. Our athletic director's kind of, at the time, he's since moved on from the university, but at the time was kind of very stone-faced when you're doing stuff, and you're just not quite sure if he's liking what you're saying or not. But, man, I was just kind of laying it out there. And I go back down to my office and get a call from our associate AD 5 minutes later saying, hey, come back up here. We want to talk to you. It's like, all right. And so walk back upstairs, and he basically tells me, he said, we got to go through some red tape. We got to kind of go through everything and kind of get a waiver for the process and all this stuff. So we're not going to be able to announce it for a couple of weeks, but, we want you to be our next head coach. And I remember obviously being, at the time, you don't really realize that. I'm excited. I'm smiling, all this stuff. And I get back down and call my wife as soon as I get back in there. And she's like, well, how'd the interview go? I said, well, I think they just offered me the job. And she breaks down into tears. She's excited. And man, it was a pretty surreal moment. It's one I'll never forget for sure. It was emotional. It was exciting. And again, I don't think you think about any of the difficult things that come along with this, but man, I was 29 and said, you know what, let's surround myself with some of the best people I can and go to work and see what we can do.
Yeah. And that's such a amazing story, and for how young you were, and you're still young now, obviously, only a few years into it, but that 3 minutes of panic that you talked about, I'm just kind of thinking back, like on a much smaller scale, I became the head coach of my old high school before I moved on to college when I was 26. And I just remember getting that call and being that young to be a head coach at just a tiny high school. I remember that panic and thinking, okay, I got to meet with this booster person and get this going. And Jim, I kind of start getting into I got to do all this stuff. And so you get the job, and now, what did your first 30 to 60 days look like after you took over? What are some things that you did to try to change or put your mark on the program right away?
Well, I think the first thing when you get in that mode was we work so hard at recruiting, and recruiting is really the lifeblood of what we do, and so whether it's not just necessarily the most talented kids, but the right kids. I was a recruiting coordinator for 5 years at Maryland before I got the job, and so I'm sitting here and it's like, I had to basically get on the phone because, you're recruiting kids that are freshmen in high school all the way through seniors in high school. So you're trying to get a hold of these kids in whatever means, per NCAA rules that you can. And you're trying to, reassure them that, hey, I'm staying, I'm going to be here. Because I think what ends up happening is when your head coach moves on, you just assume the assistants will go with them. And so you have this group of, over the course of 4 classes, you probably got about 20 kids sitting there like, what the heck's going on? Like, this is where I was going, and now what am I doing? So my first probably 48 hours was just phone calls with trying to get on the phone with parents and recruits and assuring them that, hey, I'm going to be here. I'm going to put a staff together. We're good. And so realistically, out of that whole thing, we only lost 2 kids through the whole thing, which is pretty remarkable across 4 classes. So, that was kind of the beginning stages. And then after that, I think the most important thing any leader, any team does is I had to put together a staff, and being a younger guy, I needed to put a staff together of people that were extremely good at what they did and that I could trust that they could really do their jobs. And fortunately for me, 3 of them, one of my assistants who's the recruiting coordinator now, Pap, who's our volunteer assistant right now, and then Megan Kane, who's our director of operations, were all on staff with me when I was an assistant. So I had talked to them. All 3 of them are Maryland grads. I had said, you know what, here's kind of what I want to do. I want you guys to stay here. Here's my vision for doing this. So my life became much, much easier when all 3 of them agreed, because what that meant is I just had to go find one guy. And so for me, I was a catcher growing up, so I'd worked with pitchers. I'd done some stuff with there, but I just know how big having the right pitching guy is. And so that was really my next 2 to 3 weeks was trying to lock down a pitching coach. And I knew exactly who I wanted. Corey Mascara was at St. John's before, had done an unbelievable job putting a good product on the field. But what sold me on him is he had called me about a player that spring. And him and I get to talking, and we talked about 10 minutes about that player, and then ended up just talking about kind of coaching philosophy and this and that. And I just knew so much that what he believed in and his vision for coaching went so much deeper than just coaching pitchers that I really didn't have a list of pitching coaches. I had Corey, and I said, I've got to do whatever I can do to get him down. So I had to put my recruiting coordinator hat back on, and I had sold him pretty quick. But the big thing is I had to sell his wife. They had a young son. She's lived in the hometown that her family lived in. She had a great job. She was very, very happy where they were at. So, my next month became selling Susie on why Maryland was a good fit for them and their family. And fortunately enough, we were able to come to an agreement, make it work. And we kind of got that. Once we got Corey in place, we basically hit the ground running recruiting and finished up the summer with that, trying to get ready for our first fall. So that was really probably the first month and a half of me being in that position.
And you bring up a great point that I think a lot of people might not really think about when they hear about coaches. And there's times, especially the Division I level and some of the major sports, where head coaches and assistant coaches are making a lot of money or things like that. And although that's not the case across the board, I think the one really interesting thing is the family dynamics of when you're an assistant coach or you're, become a head coach somewhere and you have to move your family all over the place, and the path that especially like an assistant has to take to kind of work their way up the ladder can be really difficult. And so you talking about trying to get, pitching coach and selling the wife, our head coach here at Chapman was at Division I for a long time. And he tells me a lot of those stories about guys that either took or didn't take a job because of the family aspect of it.
No doubt. And to be honest, those are the guys I really respect. There's a guy that I know that had a chance this last summer to go to to one of the best schools in the country, realistically, to coach baseball. And, he's at a good school, good mid-major school, does well, is a great coach, great recruiter. Had a chance to what everybody in the baseball world would be like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Why would you do that? But basically said no because it was where he was at was a better spot for him and his family right now. And those are the guys I really respect, because I think those are the guys that do it for the right reasons. They do it because they love coaching. They don't need the fame. They don't need the coolness of it. They do it because they can make a living for their family, and it's something they love doing. So it's almost refreshing when you see the guys that are willing to say no for their families instead of putting the job in front of them.
Sure.
So Susie put it was a lot of work into it, but it was I think it's been a great fit for their whole family. They've had their second son down here, and they're doing well. So I think it's going pretty well.
Good to hear. So let's talk about recruiting a little bit, because I do a ton of it here out at Chapman, and I'm always interested in talking to other coaches that are really, into recruiting and for you, I mean, that's the lifeblood of your program, is getting guys that are the right fit for your program. And so for you guys, what are some, I guess, different terms, but, non-negotiables that recruit must have, or, attributes that you look for in all your recruits outside of the obvious talent that they might have?
Sure. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think every coach will tell you, yeah, it's got to be about the right fit. But then you ask the question, how do you figure that out? And that's the hardest thing, because you're sitting here and, like I said, some of these kids we're recruiting right now are freshmen in high school. If I rewound the clock back to when I was 14, I had no idea where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. I weighed 135 pounds. There's no way I would have even been mentally ready to have a conversation with a college coach.
Right.
But that's kind of what we're faced with now. And so, like you said, the talent's kind of non-negotiable. You got to be able to compete. You got to be able to play at this level. But what we do, we look for, we call them OKGs. That's what kind of the term within our program. It means our kind of guys.
Okay.
And
like that.
What we really dive into, we spend a ton of time trying to, number one, figure out what drives them. How coachable are they? We give all our guys homework assignments, every kid we recruit. And so, we tell them our first conversation, we're going to sell the University of Maryland to you. I'm going to tell you all the cool things about it. I'm going to talk to you about the basketball games, the football games, the Big Ten Network, all the awesome stuff that comes with being at a major university and why you should come to Maryland. And then after that, every conversation we have, I'm going to coach you like you're one of my players here right now. So we'll do things where we'll send, a link out to a YouTube video. Say, hey, watch this video. Next time we hop on a conversation, we're going to chat about this video, what you liked about it. Does it apply to you? How can you make that work? So we'll do that. I was on the phone with a kid the other day, and I asked him if he knew who David Goggins was, and he told me he didn't. I said, okay, well, your job is to go figure out who he is, find out why I'm asking you to go look it up, and then we're going to talk about him and why he can kind of drive us to be better and what we can learn from him. And what you find is kids that can do it for a phone call or two, that they think it's kind of cool, they can have the conversation, and then they get bored with it. And you get on the phone with them, and it's like, hey, what'd you get from that video? Coach, I didn't have time to watch it. What do you mean you didn't have time to watch it? It was 3 minutes, and we haven't talked in 2 weeks. And so those are the kids, for us, what we look at, we say, what, they might be extremely talented and they might be successful. They probably will wherever they go, because we don't recruit bad players, but they're just not the right fit for us, because this is how we're going to coach you when you get here. And, red flags for us are guys that, hey, I just want to go play pro baseball. That's all I want. Okay, well, we're going to spend a lot of time trying to develop you as a man, as a father, as a son, as a person here. So if all you care about is throwing 97 and playing pro baseball, go somewhere that puts the emphasis on that. What we believe in is developing the person, developing all of that, and the byproduct of that is you becoming the best version of yourself. And if that is throwing 97 and playing in the big leagues, that's awesome. We've had a couple big leaguers come out of our program in recent years, but man, I think it's about a lot more than that. So we look for kids and spend a ton of time trying to find those deeper things. And like I said, if they're not into it, if they don't like it, and you can find out within the first 4 or 5 conversations, and from the depth of the answers, you can find out, like, hey, are they interested? Are they into it? They might not give the perfect answers, but they're trying and they're digging and they're trying to figure it out. Those are kids that we're going to stay on and keep trying to figure more information out. But we refer to it kind of as a growth mindset. Mm-hmm. Guys that don't have a growth mindset just don't fit in our program. Guys that aren't tough. We look for guys that have had adversity in their lives, and everybody's adversity is different. You have, losing loved ones to getting cut from your middle school basketball team. Like, there's all sorts. Everybody's adversity is a little different, but guys that have kind of had the silver spoon in their mouth, those guys just don't fit in as well as what we're looking for. So again, not that they can't be successful, not that they can't be at the highest level, but just the way we coach and the way we go about it, guys that have kind of been through some things, guys that want to learn, guys that want to grow, guys that aren't afraid to kind of get punched in the mouth and keep moving forward. Those are the guys that are really going to win a lot of games for us and that we're going to have fun waking up and coaching every day.
Absolutely. And man, you touched on a lot of great stuff there. And I'm, sort of reflecting as you're talking about, our process as well here at Chapman and the similar things that we're trying to get out of it and how we go about doing it. For you, so you're kind of still getting your, type of guys, the OKG kind of guys.
Sure.
So have you seen, since you got this first class in and then developing the guys that were still there from when you were an assistant, have you seen kind of a cultural shift into more of how you would go about coaching over the last year and a half?
Yeah. And it's taken every bit of that to kind of get to it. Your first year, I think you enter into it and you have these grand ideas of I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And this is going to change everything. And this is a game changer. And you find out, what, some of it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
and so, we had a tough year my first year. And, I think there was just a lot of internal struggles too. We had some ideas that we thought would work that just didn't work as well. We had a really talented team last year, and one of my favorite guys to watch coach, I'm obsessed with Sean McVay.
Yeah.
Over with the Rams.
Mm-hmm.
That guy rolls in, he's coaching an NFL team at 32 years old and they're 11-2 or whatever they are. And you just expect, hey, I'm a young coach. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk into this thing. I'm going to take us to Omaha our first year. We're going to be awesome. And then we were 24-30 and had the worst year in the past 6 years since I've been here. And it was a super humbling thing, but it was also unbelievably good for me because everything we talk about to our players is failure is a prerequisite to be successful. Like there's very few people that haven't failed at some point. There's very few companies that haven't hit a wall and struggled. But what do you learn from failure and how can you apply that to the next piece and keep moving? And that's kind of been our thing. Last year I think, the best way I could put it is I think there were some situations where as a coach we took some things for granted. We had an older team, we had a talented team, and as a head coach I just assumed some things. And basically turns out that these kids are still 18 to 22 years old and you can't assume anything. And that was a really good lesson to learn in year one. Really hard lesson to learn, but a really good one. But I thought, it took us about a year to really kind of get the right situation. The DNA of the group that we have this year is really strong. And you know what? We're not as talented. I don't know if we're going to go win 30 games. I don't know if we're going to win 20 games. I don't know if we'll win 40 games. I think there's a lot to be determined with this team, but the DNA of this group is what we're looking for. And, these classes that we have coming in, our 2019 recruiting class was on their official visit this last October or November, whenever it was. And it was just so great spending time with them and their families and diving in. You're getting to really get a deeper level of, we're presenting them with all this stuff. This is what you're going to expect it to do. Here's the pillars of our program. Here's why we do what we do. And really just laying all this stuff out. And I think that's the most important thing. I think any book you read, any podcast you listen to about successful companies or successful teams, it's really the number one piece is getting the right people on the ship, getting the right people on board. And like I said, I think it's taken about 18 months for us to really get plugged into making sure we're kind of operating the way we want to operate with the people we want to operate with. But I think we really got to move in the right direction.
That's great. You mentioned a book a couple minutes ago by David Goggins, or maybe you didn't mention the book, but I wanted to ask you about it. Can't Hurt Me. And
oh yeah,
Papio and I were talking, and he said I should ask you about the fact that you don't particularly enjoy running, but you were making yourself get up and run. And so what is that teaching you about yourself that then you're passing on to your guys?
Well, one thing I learned from kind of a mentor of mine, Matt Deggs, who's the head coach at Sam Houston State down here at Texas. He's a head baseball coach down here. And he talks all the time, like, don't be afraid to get in it with your guys. Like, get in it, show them you're not asking them to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. So we've been talking to our guys about all the time, about choosing to do the difficult things. A buddy of mine works at the Naval Academy here in Annapolis, and, he was talking to me about one thing they teach the midshipmen when they come in their plebe year is one of their mottos is choose to do the hard thing on purpose. And I thought it's brilliant. It's like if you come to an elevator and the stairs, take the stairs. Always keep choosing to do the hard thing on purpose. And basically what that does, and when I heard David Goggins had a book coming out, I've been obsessed with that guy and just unbelievably impressed with what that guy does for years. And when I heard he had a book came out, I pre-ordered it, got the book in. And I have about a 40-minute commute back and forth to campus. And so I listen to podcasts all the time, audiobooks all the time. And I downloaded his audiobooks. I was in the middle of reading another book, and I was like, you know what, I don't want to wait. I want to dive into this one. And it was really neat because it was kind of part audiobook, part podcast. And, he would have this narrator reading through, and then they would kind of dive in and start dissecting different stories and different thoughts and all this stuff. And it was fascinating. But one of the terms he uses in that book that I thought was unbelievable was he talks about callousing your mind. That's his term. He used callous your mind. And, he's got his upbringing is unbelievably hard. You talk about a guy that's had struggle and hardship. That guy's seen his fair share, particularly as a kid. And then his whole story coming up through there. But, he, with kind of both things in mind of the idea of callousing your mind and choosing to do the hard thing on purpose, I'd been thinking about things like, what do I hate doing? Like, what is something that I just despise? And by Pap saying I don't love running, I hate running almost more than anything. Like, I would rather do a lot of things other than run. And so I've been having kind of this tug, like, you know what, I need to just do it. I need to just do it. And it took me like a week to actually say it out loud. And I looked at my wife and I said, babe, I don't know if I want to tell you this, but I kind of feel like I'm going to start running. And her jaw like hit the ground because she understands how much I hate it. And so I explained to her this whole thing of, you know what, I want to choose to do the hard thing on purpose. And so it's been about 3 weeks now. I went from my very first run. I ran 0.8 miles and I thought I was going to have to call an ambulance because I thought I was going to die on the side of the road. To like this morning I ran, I think it was 2.4 miles, which is still
That's
nothing,
great.
But it's been 3 weeks and it's, 6 days a week I get up, and whether I work out or don't work out, it's like I'm going to dedicate 20 minutes to doing this. And it's just been a really good thing because it's amazing how I think it can, I just feel like if I'm asking my players to do some of this, that I need to be living it out too. And, while I'm not kind of making some of the things they are, that's one way that I can really put myself in a situation I don't want to be in and try to start callousing the mind up a little bit.
Man, that's great. And I a lot of stuff in there, but you talked about, and I don't want to mispronounce his name, but Matt Deggs, is it?
Yeah. Yep.
And about getting in it with your guys and you doing something that you hate. I would imagine that creates a connection with young guys where they see their head coach doing something. They're not just saying, hey, be resilient, or hey, go through adversity. You actually yourself are doing it. And I would imagine as a young coach, that helps create respect from the players to you, because you're only 10 to 12 years older than some of these guys you're coaching, which is, it's just not a big difference. And so I know, and reflecting on myself, trying to figure out ways like when you're really young and these guys aren't very much younger than you, how you create that respect so that you can kind of lead them where you need them to go. And so imagine these kinds of things that you're doing help build that bond between you and your players.
No doubt. And I think, part of what Deggs used to tell me all the time, he's like, Rob, don't be afraid to let them see you laugh. Don't be afraid for you to let them see you cry. Be vulnerable with your boys, be real. And I think what happens through stuff like that is you create trust. And, another one of my favorite authors is Simon Sinek. And he talks about in his book, Leaders Eat Last, he talks all the time about this idea of, if people don't feel safe, if they don't feel like they can be if they don't trust the people around them and can be open and vulnerable with people around them, then they're not going to operate at the highest level that they can operate in. And so that's kind of my view. And I think, you'd have to talk to the players to see how they feel, but that's kind of my aim at this is, number one, this is improving kind of me as myself, I believe. But number two, it's kind of showing them guys, I'm kind of in it with you on a different level. I'm 10 years older, but I'm trying to get in here and live what I'm preaching. And I hope that builds some trust and accountability and some authenticity with the boys a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were a Kansas State catcher, you're a standout catcher at Kansas State, and then you played for a few years after before deciding to go into coaching. Mm-hmm. What is it about the position of a catcher? I read before as I was preparing for the interview that almost 50% of the current Major League Baseball head coaches at one point last season were former catchers. Mm-hmm. What is about the position that you think lends itself to these guys then becoming head coaches?
I think there's just so much crossover with it. As the catcher, you're kind of the general of the field. You know, you're controlling the defense. You're working with the position players. You know, you're a position player yourself, so you're spending countless hours hitting with them, kind of pounding at your craft with this group of guys. And then you're also incredibly connected with the pitching staff, because to me, the best catchers aren't the guys that throw the best or receive the best or block the best. The best catchers are the guys that can pull whatever they need to pull out of the guy standing on the mound. And so I think there's just this natural fit of you're having to control so many different pieces of the game that it's kind of a natural progression that you see things that the guy at third base isn't worried about. You see things that the center fielder doesn't care about. You see things that the guy sitting down in the bullpen getting ready to come in and try to close the game doesn't really care about. So I think you're just so tied in with so many facets of the game that it allows kind of you to see that stuff as you move into the next role. And so yes, I played 2 years of pro ball, knew I really wanted to coach, and got a chance to step into it. So it was it was a pretty good opportunity for me.
I was 26 years old when I got the call saying I would become the next head basketball coach at my high school alma mater, Costa Mesa. I remember the feeling in my stomach, the mixture of joy, panic, the nerves, all rolled up into one. What did I know about being the face of a program? About being in charge of 50 plus high school kids from mostly low-income backgrounds, about dealing with boosters, handling a budget, scheduling tournaments and games, working with teachers and counselors, running fundraising campaigns, ordering new uniforms and shoes, and oh yeah, coaching basketball. I reflect back on my first few weeks as a young head coach, and it gives me so much respect for someone like Rob Vaughn, who, in his 20s, became a head coach at a well-known and prestigious university. I can, but at the same time, really cannot relate to how he felt in taking that leap at such a young age. But, as Rob outlined, the only thing you can do when facing a seemingly gigantic task is begin. To take the sentiment from one of Rob's favorite books, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. There's something special about coaching of all kinds, about taking a group of various talents and personalities and pushing, pulling, and guiding them toward a common goal. It is at times both the most rewarding and heartbreaking thing you can do. But some people just have the knack and desire for getting groups together. And when you hear Rob Vaughn speak about leadership, you can feel that he is one of those people. A constant learner and not afraid to chop wood and carry his own water, he will no doubt continue to build the Maryland baseball program for years to come. Rob's constant thirst for knowledge In his eagerness to grow from mistakes and be fully invested in the struggles of building a team is no doubt what makes him a fantastic leader. To end with a quote from another of Rob's favorite books, The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews. A leader must encourage others to struggle and assure them that the struggles are worthwhile. Do battle with the challenges of your present, and you will unlock the prizes of your future. Do you like the analytical movement in baseball now and the shifts and all the stuff that's going on? Do you think that it's made the game better, or are you more traditionalist?
I'm pretty traditional with it, but we use the shifts ourselves. I think it's, if you have the data and you have the information, I think it's a little bit foolish not to use it. I think you kick on the TV and you see the teams constantly playing in the World Series, and they're the guys that are kind of at the cutting edge of some of this analytical stuff. I think it's a little bit ignorant to ignore. But at the same time, I think there's pieces of the game that is kind of gut feel stuff. I think there's situations where, the scouting reports can tell you this, and I know that from a catcher. I remember many times my pitching coach would sit with me in the locker room, and we'd be going through the scouting report before the game started, and about the third inning, I'd have thrown that thing out the window, and I'd just be trying to read what was going on in the game. And, I think pro ball and in college ball and high school ball are just so different because there's so much information. Those guys in professional baseball are getting 600 at-bats a year for the past 15 years, and the amount of cameras, the amount of statisticians, everybody involved and working on there, they have information where they can do crazy things. College is a little bit better than high school, but especially at our level, we don't have a tenth of what those guys are operating with. So I think sometimes guys get a little bit too cute with it at our level and try to do things because a guy hit the ball over here one time. And I just think it overcomplicates things. I think there's some beauty to reading the game and doing that. But like I said, if you have the information at your hands and you have the ability to use it, I think you're a little bit foolish not to.
Are there any things that you see that baseball could do to, I know like every sport is kind of always tinkering with rules or adjustments to the game to try to make it, more entertaining or faster or score more points. Are there things that you see in the game of baseball that could be adjusted as it goes forward?
Well, here's the thing that's funny to me, and this is where I am a little bit more old school with it. The biggest thing people want to talk about is pace of play, especially with baseball, is they want to pace of play this. There's now how much time you can have between pitches and how many visits you can take to the mound and all this stuff. And the thing that is just so confusing to me is we're working to cut down all this stuff, but then we add instant replay, which instantly slows the game down. And
right.
I'm a fan of instant replay. I'm anytime we can help those umpires out, I'm in for that. But, I think one of the things that it does is, okay, so we take a game from 3 hours and 30 minutes to 3 hours and 20 minutes. If you don't really like baseball, if you don't appreciate it, 10 minutes isn't changing your mind whether you're watching the game or not, And so I think sometimes we get a little bit, we get into changing rules for the sake of changing rules. And every year in college baseball, the hit by pitch rule changes, or every 2 years, whatever it is, there's a new rule, and they throw all this stuff at you, where the pitcher's toes can face versus when he's in the stretch versus when he's in the windup. And it's fine. I'm easy. I'll go with it. We're going to coach up whatever the rules are. But baseball is a beautiful game, man. And I think sometimes we start trying to overcomplicate things with crazy rules. But you start working. I think some of the good ones they throw out, I think anytime we're dealing with player safety, especially when it comes to head injuries and stuff like that, I think anything we can do with that is huge. To make sure those guys are taken care of. But man, this is a beautiful game. I don't like overcomplicating it.
Sure. Speaking of going to a game and going to the stadium to watch a game. Why does a hot dog taste so good at a baseball game as opposed to anywhere else that you have a hot dog?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Shoot, there's just something about ballpark food. I don't even eat Cracker Jacks, but if I go to a game, I'm getting a thing of Cracker Jacks, and I don't know, man. There's just something about it. We go to, Camden Yards up here is a great place to watch a game, and it's a place I'd obviously never been until we moved up here, but just there's something about it. The O's had a pretty tough one this year, but there's something about going out there, getting a hot dog, getting a beer, and some Cracker Jacks, and sitting there with your family watching a game. Man, there's just nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but I don't have many hot dogs per year. But when when I go watch the Angels or the Dodgers, it's like, man, that thing tastes good. Right. When you're sitting in the.
That's right. That's right.
You obviously have a passion for leadership. Like you can just kind of feel it coming off of you. Is that something that you always had as a kid? Were you always kind of the team captain and the leader, or have you developed over time?
I think I've always kind of been the guy that, I think it starts when you have group projects in school. There's always that weird thing when you're in high school or you're in middle school and they're like, okay, you three are in a group and you three are in a group. Everybody stares at each other for like 20 seconds to figure out who's going to make the first move. And I was always the guy that I might not know what I'm doing, but I'm going to start organizing stuff and doing that. And my wife says my OCD level is extremely too high. But I've always kind of had that natural inclination to drive organization or to drive kind of just moving. And, the more I've kind of dove into that, you start to see one of the first books I ever read was that kind of talked about this was Andy Andrews wrote a book called The Traveler's Gift. It's actually the first book I ever bought Pap when he started coaching for me. And he talks about one of the stories in there. He talks about if you don't know what to do something. And so I've always kind of naturally done that. Like, I don't necessarily know what goes first, but let's just start moving and we'll figure it out. And to be honest with you, it's really been over about the last 2 to 3 years. And last Christmas, I bought a book called It Starts With Why by Simon Sinek. It was his first one. And I would say kind of my obsession with it started then with the first book I wrote was Pete Carroll's Win Forever. That was the first one kind of in coaching and having a philosophy and doing that and kind of at least making me think about it. But it wasn't until last Christmas that it really became an obsession of trying to say, like, what do great people do across sports, across business? I'm reading a book right now about Netflix and kind of their is by Patty McCord and just talking about kind of their countercultural approach to doing things. And that's always kind of how I've been. I've been the guy that never wanted to do things because other people did it. And if there was something that could be cut out because it was pointless, let's cut that out and not waste our time on it. But it's really been probably over the last year to 18 months that I've really been on this journey of trying to figure out what do the best do and how could we maybe implement that. And even personally, how can I implement that to be a better husband and to be a better father to my 2.5-year-old, and so,
sure.
So that's where it's really started for me. And I think, I've naturally kind of had some of those and I've been in positions of leadership throughout my life, but didn't really know what in the world I was doing. And, it's really been, like I said, over about the last year to 18 months that I've really dove into trying to really learn as much as I can about it.
Sure. And University of Maryland has had just overall kind of a difficult year from the football program with what went on and what happened. And not asking you to comment at all about anything particular that happened, but what have you kind of learned about leadership and how things work at such a high level from that experience and being so close to it at the same school?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's been a very, very challenging, probably 6 to 8 months for our university and the athletic department. But what I've just been incredibly impressed with is the great thing about the way our offices are set up at the university is I'm on the same floor as John Tillman, who's the best lacrosse coach in the entire country, who's won national championships, with Sasha Surofsky, who's been there for 23 years and just won the national championship in soccer this year. with Kathy Reese, who's the women's lacrosse coach, who does nothing but go to Final Fours and win championships, to Missy Maharg, who's the field hockey coach for the women, and they were just in the finals in the national championship game this year, and they do nothing but win. And it was really neat to be able to watch people that kind of were in my same position 15 to 20 years in front of me, and there was never panic. There was never any craziness like that. Our administrative department is right on top of us. They're on the third floor, and just going up there, and those were some rough times. There's a lot of people not knowing kind of, am I going to have a job tomorrow? Am I not? And you start talking about, I think that's when you really see the test of a leader, when you see the test of a company or a team, is when you are going through a firestorm, because that's what it was. It was a challenging time. Shoot, there was a 19-year-old young man that lost his life, and that was an unbelievable tragedy. And to see a group of players in the football team kind of bond together, and they didn't have a great year. We finished one game shy of bowl eligibility, but shoot, we go out there, and to see those kids every single week go out and lay it out there together. And Coach Canada, who had been there for 6 weeks and becomes the interim head coach, be able to lead those boys for the last 6 to 8 months has been incredibly encouraging, because there's some times where you're just walking through the fire and you can't stop your feet from moving,
right?
And I think you're gonna get hit, you're gonna get punched in the mouth, and I think that's the true test of leadership and of a team, is when you are walking through that. Do you come out the other side? Do you quit when it gets hard? Which a lot of people do. A lot of people, it gets uncomfortable, the heat gets turned up, and they said, yep, that's not for me. But I've been incredibly encouraged. I think we've got a unbelievable coach leading the charge now. We just brought Mike Loxley in, who's an offensive coordinator at Alabama, and not only is he a good coach, I mean, that guy spent the past 4 years with maybe the best coach of all time in Nick Saban, but at the same time, I think he's a guy that really wanted to be here. He's a guy that cares deeply about this university and about this place. And I think, it couldn't be the more perfect fit to help us continue kind of the healing process and walking through it. But it's been a challenging time. But like I said, I think that's when you really see the true colors of people in your administration and people in your coaching athletic department. And, I've been nothing but incredibly impressed and very thankful to be a part of that university.
Great. Yeah. And as a Maryland fan myself, obviously my sister going there and being a gymnast, and we're very close to all that. And we're looking forward to how it shakes out and how kind of moves forward from it, like you said. You, as a head coach, you're doing recruiting and scouting and budgeting and work with your team, and you've got a million things on your plate that you're doing from day to day. But what about coaching brings you the most satisfaction?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think year one, I tried to do all of it, and I realized that I have really great people around me, and delegation is a beautiful thing, and being able to take some of that and say, what do we each do? I have 5 members of my staff. I have myself, 3 assistant coaches, and a director of baseball operations. Said, okay, we got 5 of us here on a team. So how can we each do what we excel at the most? And so that's what we kind of went in the process of trying to do this year, and trying to spread some of that out. And, there's 2 things that, number one, like you said a few minutes ago, I found like this idea of culture and leadership and environment is my number one obsession. I wake up thinking about it. I go to sleep thinking about it. I think about it in my truck when I'm driving into work. I mean, it's something I'm constantly thinking about. How can I take this and help these young guys at 20 years old start to learn some of this? Because if we can get this in them, there's absolutely no chance they're not successful, whether it's in baseball, whether it's out in the business world, whether it's in their family life, they will be successful. So I love coaching that, and then the one thing I kind of pulled out of this year that I'm involved a little bit more in, or kind of a lot more in this year, is just kind of the offensive piece. I was our hitting coach for 5 years here, and kind of pulled away from it last year, and got back involved. And, just really the idea of team offense. I love being on the field and coaching team offense and just figuring out not how do we hit home runs, not how do we do all this stuff that everybody wants to talk about, all the sexy things guys want to talk about, but how do we score 7 runs a game? Because if we can score 7 runs a game, we're going to win a lot of baseball games.
Right.
And so just being out there with the guys and figuring it out, and sometimes we try something and it's terrible and it stinks and I make them worse, and it's like, hey, let's scrap that and start over again tomorrow. We'll be all right. And just kind of that process, that's what my biggest takeaway I've had this year, and my wife's tired of hearing me talk about it because it's my kind of current little obsession is it's really everybody wants to talk about the end goal and getting to the end of what my goals are and this and that. But at the end of the day, the fun is in the journey. The fun and the goal is the journey itself. And the journey itself sometimes sucks, and it's sometimes really hard, and it's sometimes really messy. But that's what makes it awesome, and that's what I'm kind of learning through making myself run and do some of this is it's not about how many miles I run. It's not about what my pace is. It's not about any of this. It's kind of just that grind and that uncomfortable struggle in the pride you take in the kind of way that's your best teacher. And so that's the part that I love is just kind of the journey of the fall of building your team, of kind of creating the culture, of creating kind of the DNA of your team. Because once you get to the spring, it's too late. It's your DNA is set. What you're going to be is set. You can work on some, mechanical stuff here and there and some strategy stuff here and here, but the mental culture DNA of your team is built in the fall. And that is kind of my thing that I love diving in on. And that's why I love kind of the building almost more than I love just the gameplay.
Sure. And you're such a positive guy, and you're so, you talk so much about resiliency and bouncing back and building. But what are maybe the more difficult things as a head coach that you find for yourself to bounce back from? Is it a guy that just isn't getting it? He's having attitude issues and he's off the field issues, or a tough loss where, should have won a game. What is harder for you to move on from than maybe say other things?
I'd say last year was exactly what you said there at the end. Last year, my identity and who I was as a person was incredibly tied into the results on the field for us. And that's a really dangerous place to be, because that's where I tell our players all the time, baseball's what you do, not who you are. And it's extremely important to understand that and really believe that. But last year I let my identity get really tied up in Rob Vaughn, the baseball coach. And so what that meant is when we were playing good and winning games, I was in great mood. I was a great husband when I got home. I was really good with my kiddo when I got home. And when we weren't, I was not. I would kind of be in a shutdown mode. I was my body language was bad. I was sulking. I was a little bit feeling bad for myself and just in this kind of funk that I just could not get out of. And that was one of my biggest takeaways from last year is that's what I had to learn is baseball and coaching baseball is what I do, not who I am. And the world and everybody around you is going to judge you by your wins, by your losses. But at the end of the day, that's not what I want to judge our stuff by. And that's not what I want to be known as. And whenever, none of us know when this time is, but whenever we leave this world, I want people to be able to look back and say, I left this place better than I found it. And there's a lot of guys that have a lot of national championships on their wall that have all this stuff that didn't leave the world better than they found it. And so for me, that's kind of one of my big takeaways. And that's something that is a constant struggle. I'm a competitive guy. I like winning. I like competing. And so being able to not necessarily divorce yourself from the result, because I believe in keeping score. If we're going to play a game and we ain't keeping score, I don't want to play. Like I want to beat you in whatever it is. But at the same time, being able to make sure that your identity is tied to something deeper and whatever that is for people, but finding something bigger to pour yourself into, because if you're going to let, wins and losses determine who you are and how you behave, I think that's the definition of being one of the most unresilient people you could possibly be.
Yeah, it's a hard world the coaching world is so difficult because of the wins and losses, and especially yourself. You're at a Power 5 conference, and your games are on TV and in the paper, and you do. And I just know from my end, like every game, there's so much preparation, so much work into every single game. And then at the end of it, it's either a win or a loss.
True.
And like you said, everybody else just sees that, and they don't have access to all the other stuff. And so,
sure,
great what you talked about, tying yourself to something bigger than just that. And so, what are some of the things that you tie yourself to now, as opposed to last year, that are just bigger than the wins and losses?
Sure. I think, there's so much, and I think everybody, and I've said this to recruits, I've said this to people in general, everybody wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves. I think there's an innate desire in every human to be a part of something bigger. And for me and in my family, really, that's my faith big time, and I grew up in a Christian household and in this and that, but I didn't really know what that meant until I grew up and really kind of got life thrown at me, and that's when I think like you said, you start figuring out kind of what do you really believe? What do you really feel? And for me, that's kind of become my thing is, like Jesus doesn't care whether I win or lose a baseball game. He cares how I'm treating people, how I'm impacting lives, and how I'm helping these young men grow. And that's something I just constantly remind myself about is, my identity is what I believe in is that I'm a child of the king of the universe. That's really where my identity is tied, not in Rob Vaughn, the baseball coach. And he didn't call me to win a national championship. I hope like crazy that's in the cards for me. And I'm going to work every single day for that to happen. But he doesn't love me any more, any less, whether I win or lose a game. And so that's kind of been my I don't want to say a new outlet or something, because it's something that's been with me all the time, but I think it's something that you can just really lose sight of. Mm-hmm. So really my faith has really been what I've tied myself into, just a bigger piece of that's really what it's all about for me. And the byproduct is kind of everything that flows out.
What's one of the best investments that you've made in your career?
I think there's several. I think, number one is just investing the time into immersing yourself in people that are smarter than you, that are better than you, and surrounding yourself with that. I firmly believe that the people that I work with every day, and those are the people that make me who I am. There's all sorts of studies out there that say you're going to become an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so number one is just investing in people, investing in trying to learn and grow and say, you know what, being humble enough to say this guy does things way better than me. So how can I dive in there and how can I learn from him? How can I keep my mouth shut, not tell him what I know, but let him talk to me and let me just take in this information. Mm-hmm. And the second piece is just investing time into reading and studying. I think that can be different for everybody. I mean, some guys don't love reading, and reading comes hard for them. The beauty is now there's books on tape about everything. There's podcasts on everything. And I think that's kind of been one of the more fruitful things that's come out for me, because it's made me a better person. It's made me a kind of a better version of who I am, just because it's constantly challenging the status quo and constantly pulling different things out and trying to say, is this the best way of doing things? Okay, this is the way we've done it for the last 10 years, but does that mean it's the right thing? And a lot of that stuff is driven from just the investment of time and energy into realizing and having the humility that I don't have everything figured out. I never will have everything figured out. And does my growth mindset allow me to grow and to learn?
Wow, that's some great stuff there. A lot of, as you're talking, I'm like reflecting and like getting hyped up about what am I doing? What are my investments? So it's good. And you've talked about a lot of great books throughout this podcast. You've talked about David Goggins' book, Simon Sinek. You've got Andy Andrews, A Traveler's Gift, Carol Dweck, growth mindset. I know you're a reader, and I know that you listen and take stuff in all the time. Outside of what you've already mentioned, are there any other books or podcasts that people listening to this, you could direct them to that you think are beneficial for them?
I think two of the first books that I have my players start with when they start asking me about recommendations are, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin wrote two books, Extreme Ownership and then The Dichotomy of Leadership is their new one that just came out. Both of those are just unbelievable reads, and I think it's just very counterintuitive to human nature. I think we're in a world where the idea of taking ownership and for your life, for situations around you, it's people want to be a victim of their circumstance. People want to make excuses when things don't go right for them, and instead of saying this is kind of where we're at, this is how we're going to fix it. Let's start moving. And I think those two books are incredible for anybody that is leading any kind of people. I think those are awesome. There's he's not a new author, but I've kind of just stumbled upon his books very recently. And, we did a thing this winter for our players where our last team meeting, and I think I even posted this on Twitter, I put up 15 books. And I told our guys, I said, you have to pick one of these books from this list. Don't care what it is, which one it is. Pick one of these 15, and then go get, we bought our guys at the beginning of the year these little, they're like 99-cent composition notebooks that you get when you're in first grade going to your first class. But get a composition notebook, and I want you to read 10 pages a day, go through here, highlight stuff, write stuff down in the notebook that really stands out to you, how it applies to you, how it applies to our team, and this and that. And two of the books that I put on there were from this author that I just really found probably 2 months ago, and I've already read two of his books. And his name's Joshua Medcalf, and he's got two books, or he's got several books, but the two books of his I've read so far is Chop Wood, Carry Water is one of them, which is incredible. It's just, what he does is he tells these stories. So he does it in kind of a fable form where he tells these fictional stories, but they're just chock full of leadership principles. And so they're incredibly easy reads, but they're just packed with awesome information about leadership, about anything you can imagine. I mean, they're unbelievable. So Chop Wood, Carry Water was his first one. And then kind of the follow-up to that was called Pound the Stone. And we have 3 or 4 of our guys in that team are reading those books, but those are some of the big ones. I think, I could go on and on. Grit, I think, is one of the best books that's out there as far as learning, like how kind of grit is what determines success or failure for people, not necessarily talent, not necessarily skill, but what kind of grit do you have to walk through things. Grit's one of the best books out there as well. It's by Angela Duckworth. It's a really, really good book. So those are some of the ones off the top of my head. I've got a office full of
I'm sure
books on my bookshelf that I could start. If we did that, we'd be on here for another hour.
I know. What I love whenever I go and visit another assistant or head coach's office, basketball, wherever it is, I love just peeking at their bookshelf because it's always interesting and there's always a lot of great stuff on there. And so, but man, you said a lot of great stuff, and there's a lot that I have to go through now. And the Joshua Metcalf books, I haven't read any of those, and I think I'm going to have to. I've got audible.com that I listen to a lot of books on my way to work, so I'll have to pick up one of those and start listening. Rob, I know you are
great, really short reads, really good.
You're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time during over the holiday break to sit down and talk, and so much really insightful stuff. So thank you for coming on the podcast and for talking about leadership and the team and all your thoughts. We really appreciate it. Before we go, where can people find you to follow you on either Twitter, online, or the Maryland baseball team?
Yeah, Twitter's really the only thing I'm on too much. I mean, Twitter's kind of my main. I'm on Instagram, and if you want to get on there, you can see pictures of my kid. That's about the only thing I put on there. But outside of that, most of my social media stuff's on Twitter, and it's just at @RVaughnUMD. @RVaughnUMD is kind of where all my stuff is. And, I'll post different things on there. The other day I posted and got some really good feedback from people about, kind of our book stuff we're going through and this and that. So, that's one place I have a list, at least of my top 15 that I really like, or one of my last posts on there. So that's kind of my main social media platform there.
Okay. And then you guys start up playing, when's your first game for Maryland baseball?
So first game is February 15th. We'll be down in Coastal Carolina in a tournament down there. So we'll get the boys back here in a couple weeks and get to work and see what we got come February 15th.
Perfect. Well, hey, I'm going to give you the last word. So anything else before we wrap up the podcast that you would like to add, Rob?
Not really, man. I mean, I've enjoyed talking through some of this, and I think the biggest thing I think that people have to remember is the idea of understanding that you never have anything completely figured out, and just going on this journey of what does it look like and how can I step out of my comfort zone and challenge myself to do things that I don't know if I can do, that I don't know if I can learn, but to step out and be courageous to do it anyway, because chances are you're going to fail. But then when you do fail, learn from it, get up, do it again. And I think that's the trait of really successful people. It's not necessarily that they're just more gifted. It's that they're just willing to fail more than most people are willing to try. And so that's kind of my biggest thing that I'm trying to learn. I'm far from it right now, but I'm getting up every day and running and trying to figure it out and trying to keep failing and figure out how I can keep getting better.
Wow, that was such a fun and informative and inspiring episode with Rob Vaughn. And we wish Rob and the rest of the University of Maryland baseball staff and team the best of luck. They just kicked off their season, and so we will be sure to follow along. Please consider subscribing on iTunes or following along on Spotify. We always appreciate it. Sign up for our newsletter at dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com. The songs you're hearing in the episode are both original tracks off of my latest record, Grandeur. The one behind us now is titled Lilac, and the one for the interlude and intro is titled Words. I'd like to thank Jack Carlino for providing the artwork for the podcast. Follow him on Instagram at JackCapturesLight. Until next time, as always, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. We'll see you soon.